Modern psychology spent 150 years mapping the human mind. Vedic thinkers had a more precise map 5,000 years earlier. And the part that should bother you is this. If you don't know which layer of your mind is running the show right now, you're not making decisions, you're just reacting. And reacting is costing you more than you think. In this video, I'll show you number one, what the four layers of the mind actually are, and why most people are stuck operating from only the most reactive one. Number two, how to identify which layer is driving your behavior in any given moment, which is the real diagnostic tool. Modern psychology is still catching up to number three. How to deliberately shift control from your reactive mind to your intelligent mind, which is the practical move that changes everything. Let's get into it. A few years ago, I was talking to a guy named Marcus, mid 30s, smart, successful by every external measure. He'd read the books, done the therapy, tried the meditation apps, and he kept saying the same thing. I know exactly what I should do, I just don't do it. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't broken. He was operating from the wrong layer of his mind, and nobody had ever shown him the map. That conversation is why this video exists. The Vedic framework for the inner mind is called the Antakarana. It translates roughly as the inner instrument. And unlike a lot of ancient philosophy that stays abstract, this one is almost embarrassingly practical. The framework identifies four distinct functions, not four personality types, not four stages of growth, four functions that are operating inside you right now simultaneously every single day. The first is manas. Think of it as your sensory processing layer. It takes in everything your senses report and generates an immediate reaction. Noise, threat, pleasure, discomfort. It's fast, it's automatic, and it has no patience for nuance. Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his work on decision making, called this system one thinking: fast, associative, reactive. The Vedic thinkers got there first and went deeper. The second function is Buddhi. This is your discriminative intelligence, the part of you that can step back, weigh options, and choose based on values rather than impulse. Kahneman's system 2. Slow, deliberate, effortful. Most people think they're operating from Buddhi most of the time. Most people are wrong. The third is Chitta. This one doesn't have a clean parallel in Western psychology, which is part of why Western psychology keeps running into walls. Chitta is your storehouse of deep impressions, memories, and conditioning. Not just what you remember, but what has shaped the lens through which you see everything. Your childhood, your failures, the moment someone laughed at you in front of a room. Chitta holds all of it, and it quietly colors every perception you have. The fourth is ahamkara, the ego function. Not ego in the Freudian sense, not arrogance. Ahamkara is the function that says, I am this. It's the identity layer, the story you tell about who you are, what you're capable of, what kind of person does or doesn't do certain things. When someone says, I'm just not a morning person or I've always been anxious, that's Ahamkara speaking. And Ahamkara is extraordinarily resistant to change because changing it feels like dying. These four layers aren't a hierarchy where one is good and one is bad. They're all necessary. The problem, and this is what Prabhupada emphasized repeatedly in his commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, is the order of command. When manas is in charge, when the reactive sensory layer is running your decisions, you suffer. Not because manas is evil, but because manas is not equipped for the job. It's like letting your car alarm make navigation decisions. The takeaway here is this: before you can change any behavior, you need to know which layer generated it. That's not therapy, that's diagnosis. Marcus, the guy I mentioned at the start, had a specific pattern. Every time his boss sent a critical email, he'd feel a surge of heat in his chest, fire back a defensive reply, and spend the next 3 hours in a spiral of self-justification. He knew, intellectually, that the defensive reply made things worse, but knowing didn't stop it. That gap between knowing and doing is not a willpower problem, it's a layer problem. His manas was receiving the email as a threat. Chitta, his stored impressions from years of feeling undervalued, was amplifying that threat signal. Ahamkara was mobilizing to protect his identity. And Buddhi, the one function that could have actually helped, was nowhere in the room. The Vedic framework gives you a diagnostic question that cuts through all of it. The question is simply, which layer is speaking right now? When you feel urgency, reactivity, The need to respond immediately, that's manas. When you feel a deep pull toward a behavior you've tried to quit 100 times, that's chitta, the impression layer running an old program. When you feel defensive when someone criticizes you and it feels like an attack on your existence rather than a comment on your work, that's ahamkara. And when you feel that quiet, clear sense of, I know what the right move is here, that's buddhi. That's the one you want making decisions. The practical skill here is what I'd call layer labeling. You don't need to meditate for an hour to do this. You need about 4 seconds and one question. When you notice a strong reaction rising, before you act on it, you ask, is this manas reacting to a sensory threat? Is this chitta running an old pattern? Is this ahamkara defending a story? Or is this actually buddhi, my clear intelligence, pointing me towards something real? Most of the time, the honest answer is one of the first three. And that honesty alone creates a gap, a small one. But a gap is all Buddhi needs to enter the conversation. In neuroscience terms, this is the prefrontal cortex reasserting itself over the amygdala response. But the Vedic framing is more useful because it gives you a specific internal landscape to navigate, not just a biological metaphor. You're not fighting your brain, you're redirecting authority from one internal function to another. Marcus started doing this with his boss's emails. He'd feel the heat, name it. That's manas, that's chitta running the old not good enough program. He'd wait 90 seconds, then he'd ask what Buddhi actually thought the situation called for. The defensive replies stopped, not because he suppressed the reaction, but because he stopped letting the reaction vote. The reason understanding your own mind psychology is valuable is not so you can become a calm robot who never reacts. It's so you can stop being governed by the layers that have the least information and the most noise. Buddhi, your discriminative intelligence, is not weak, it's just consistently outmaneuvered. Manas is faster, chitta is louder in the moments that matter most. Ahamkara is ferocious when threatened. Buddhi is quiet, and quiet tends to lose in a noisy environment. So the work is not to silence the other layers. The work is to create conditions where Buddhi can be heard. The Vedic tradition offers several practices for this, and every one of them has a modern cognitive science parallel that validates the mechanism. The first is svadhyaya, self-study, not journaling about your feelings, systematic observation of your own internal patterns. Which situations reliably trigger manas? What are your chitta triggers? The situations where an old wound activates and takes over. Where does ahamkara dig in hardest? This is not abstract philosophy. This is mapping your own internal architecture the same way you'd map a new city before driving through it. You're building what neuroscientists call metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking while it's happening. The Vedic framework just gives you a more precise map than most metacognition tools do. The second practice is what Prabhupada describes as training the mind through consistent, deliberate decision making from Buddhi, even in small things. Every time you pause before reacting and choose the Buddhi response, you're not just making a better decision in that moment, you're strengthening the neural pathway that makes Buddhi accessible under pressure. The Vedic term is abhyasa, practice through repetition. Kahneman would call it building system 2 habits. The mechanism is identical. The third, and this is the one most people skip because it sounds too simple, is working with chitta directly. Your impression layer doesn't respond to logic. You can't argue chitta into releasing an old pattern. What it responds to is new, repeated, emotionally resonant experience. This is why insight alone doesn't change behavior. Marcus could understand his defensive pattern perfectly and still repeat it because chitta wasn't updated by the understanding. It updated when he had enough new experiences of choosing Buddhi and surviving, actually surviving, without the defensive reaction protecting him. The ahamkara piece is the most delicate. Identity is the last thing to change and the thing that makes all other change permanent when it does. When Marcus stopped thinking of himself as someone who needs to defend against criticism and started thinking of himself as someone who can hear hard feedback and use it, the email spiral stopped for good, not because he white-knuckled his way through them, because the identity that generated them was no longer accurate. That shift doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from accumulated evidence that the old identity story is wrong, and you build that evidence one Buddhi-led decision at a time. The practical move today is this. Pick one recurring situation where you know manas or chitta runs the show. 1. Write down what Buddhi would actually do in that situation if it had authority. Then, the next time that situation arises, give Buddhi the vote. Just once. That's how the architecture changes. That one Buddhi led decision is where the architecture starts to shift. And if you've been doing the self work for a while and you're still watching the same patterns repeat, that's not a motivation problem. It usually means one of the four layers is running interference in a way that's hard to see from the inside. That's exactly what I do in a free one on one consultation call. 30 minutes, no pitch, no agenda, except to figure out where you're actually stuck and what the specific next move is for your situation. You'll walk away with a clear answer on which layer is blocking you and what to do about it, whether we ever talk again or not. The link to book is in the description at dailymindreset.com/consultation. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments, when you look at the four layers, which one do you think is running the show in your life most often right now?